a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
So the last player manager in the major leagues was one of our favorite players to talk about, who is not in the Hall of Fame. He has the most hits of
Pete
anybody.
Rose?
Pete Rose. So, and of course, Pete Rose got into trouble for that to a certain degree because when he was managing the Reds
That he was
they accused him, and he said he never bet again. Anyway, the point is that he's the last guy to be player manager, and he was at obviously the tail end of his career when he did this, but he would call on himself to pinch hit at times, and so it made me think. Player managers, it seems ridiculous now. Why would you ever do that, right? How could a player possibly handle the duties of what the manager has to do? And then when you really think about it, going, well, what is the manager really doing? Filling out a line. And could a player relate to his peers in a way the manager couldn't because he's on the field with them every day?
In theory, a player could do it.
Would it be a special kind of player? Would it have to be somebody who has this particular kind of personality?
Like there's nobody in baseball, I think, right now that I would be like, yeah, they could be a player manager. There's nobody that comes to mind right off the top of my head. Like the one athlete I think right now that you could probably say that's closest to a player coach is LeBron.
Well, he is a coach, isn't he?
Pretty much.
Oh, okay.
He acts like a coach.
There's another guy there who runs on the sidelines with a tie on, but I don't think
LeBron. That's LeBron's team. LeBron kind of decides what
any team that LeBron plays on, he's the coach.
Right. But the number of players, I think even though the players can relate better to one another, you don't always want that.
Well, and I think you'd want it to be a good player. I guess you can't have a lousy player be the player manager.
Or the only other way it works is if a guy doesn't play at all. He's a player manager in that, in theory, he is a player. Like Todd Frazier, who only ever occasionally pinch hit.
Right.
Could be a pain.
The Todd father.
Right. He could be a player manager because all he really does is manage, and then occasionally he would pinch hit because he's like, I think I got it tonight.
Well, let's talk about another guy. So he's the best player on his team. He might be the best player in baseball. I'd say he's the best player in the league, and that would be Fernando Tatis Jr. Why couldn't Fernando Tatis Jr. be the player manager of the Padres? He's the unesteemed leader of the team.
Because managing involves if he's managing, it means instead of being focused on what he's going to need to do in his next at bat, he's sitting there going over the pitch chart with the pitching coach, trying to decide what reliever he's going to bring in the next inning.
And I think that's true. I think you don't want him in standing out there at shortstop going, do I need to go get this guy right now?
Right. He's not focused on what he's doing as a player. So I think that alone is one of the why you would never make in the prime of his career player a player manager.
Right. It happened in the past, but not in baseball. Well, it did happen in baseball long time ago. I can think, besides Pete Rose, in basketball, there were some pretty good player coaches. A guy named Bill Russell was pretty good at it. And his basketball's a different kind of sport as well than baseball.
And it was a different era.
Well, it's a free-flowing sport, right? So being the player coach of an NBA basketball team, when you're out there running up and down the floor, you just got to figure, okay, I got to substitute guys so I don't kill him, and take myself out so I get a rest. But for the most part, the decisions are made in the flow of the game. It's not like you're making a pitching change or a pinch hitter.
Or like football where you'd be like trying to call plays. Like Peyton Manning could call an entire offense by himself, but you still needed a head coach of that football team.
Right. And there's been no player coaches in basketball either, so let me...
I think, the problem with the player coach idea is that even though the players could, one, authority would always be something that would be theoretically questionable. He's a player, not a coach. And so there's always that inherent equalness. So, sure, it's not... let's say the player manager is the best player on the team. Well... yeah, that's great when he's dealing with the scrubs and the bench guys. But what happens when he has an issue with the second best guy, the guy that gives him protection in the lineup? It's a bit awkward then.
Right.
Or what happens when the guy's not the best player on the team and he's Todd Frazier. Todd Frazier really going to be able to tell Pete Alonso, hey, Pete,
take a seat.
Take a seat.
No, I don't think it's going to happen. And look, we understand that the player manager in baseball came out of the history of the way that it was done earlier in the game's history, right? This was a kind of a normal thing.
Well, honestly, I almost think it came out of just money saving by the team owner being like, wait a second, I could just not hire a manager and tell one of the players to do it.
Well, and I don't know how much managers get paid, these days. They get paid, a lot better than they used to. That's for sure.
They get paid millions of dollars.
Right, but does a guy like Tatis need the extra $2 million for being the manager? Because of what comes with it, as you say, right? Out there going, okay, well, he's got how many pitches does he have? So you be thinking about how many pitches he's got in the seventh inning,
and or then Tatis is standing there thinking about how many pitches he's got and what he's going to say to the media after the game because he pulled the pitcher.
So even later, as late as '77, Joe Torre was player manager of the New York Mets. Okay, so the Mets were terrible in 1977.
Not a ringing endorsement for player manager right there.
I think it was, we're serious, so we're going to bring in a guy who's a great player. He was not a Hall of Fame player, by the way. He's a Hall of Fame manager, Joe Torre. He did win a batting title, and I think he was an MVP winner as well, a co-MVP winner. But he, was brought in as manager of the Mets to sort of put the organization back on more solid footing because the whole Seaver debacle at the time and whatnot, it didn't work out. In fact, he went back to the announcing booth for a while before he kind of figured out the demeanor he wanted to be a manager. Yeah. Right. And then he had a Hall of Fame managing career. So I think, it's just too much for a player unless he's at the very end of his career where you might say, you know what, let this guy, he relates to the players. And particularly if you let a manager go, you might consider a player manager as an interim manager at the end of the season.
That if you let a guy go with like a week left in the season, but then again, it's like...
Or a month left in the season. What's the difference?
I guess because you have a bench coach, why not just make him the manager? Why put it on a player? What are you going to gain by having the player
You might find out that you have a future manager by seeing how he handles it.
Yeah, but that would be only a guy that would, you were already getting ready to make a coach.
Like when David Wright was on the Mets and they kind of were cycling through some managers, I thought, this guy could be a manager one day. David Ross is a good example.
I think if David Ross was on a team and you were already thinking about making him a manager in the offseason and you fire a manager with a month left to go, maybe you make him a player manager for the last month of the season. Just what? But I think that's about the only way you get a situation.
How about a pitcher, though? How about a pitcher as player manager? Because you only pitching,
pitchers are too much of head cases to be managers.
It's spoken like a pitcher. So
think about how few pitcher managers there have been. There's a reason for that.
And this is all conjecture because, folks that are listening, there are going to be no player managers. We can talk about it, but it's just really unlikely, and it's sort of a vestige of a bygone day. So I wanted to ask you another question, though, and that has nothing to do with baseball.
Shocking.
Yeah, I know. And in fact, a future podcast I was thinking will be the one in which we talk about other sports other than baseball. We'll save that for another day. But because the Olympics are going on right now, I started thinking about you, and I trying to think about how much interest you have in the Olympics, and the first thought that came to mind was not very much. And to this older guy here who's been watching the Olympics since 1968 was the first Olympics I watched on TV when I watched Bob Beamon break the long jump record, and that was such an exciting thing in Mexico City at the time, and I know it's a really long time ago. And so I've watched the Olympics my whole life. You've watched them, I guess, but tell me what you think about the Olympics in general.
So to make a really bad analogy to a previous episode that we've done, the Olympics are kind of like interleague play in some fashion for, I think, people my age. And what I mean by that is when you were a kid growing up, your chances to be exposed to people from other countries and hear about the stories from people from all of these places was probably pretty limited. It might have been limited to almost school and the Olympics. Whereas for people like me, the idea of watching a race with people from a foreign country or watching soccer or watching something from somewhere else, you can do that whenever you want now. And so I think for a lot of people, the mystique of here's this chance to see these people and these things that I would never normally be able to see, well, that's not really there. So then you now you're down to country pride and
That's a big thing.
That's a big thing.
That's a big thing.
And general interest in the events. And I think those are down because I think in terms of pure spectacle, the Winter Olympics generally have more interesting events from a pure viewership standpoint. Like,
no, I've spoken like a true millennial, right?
Right.
I mean, come on. Yes, because the Winter Olympics is trying to X game its stuff a little bit.
Skiing and bobsledding. It's like, okay, like I get sprinting and running is interesting, but like, man, so the 200 meter just doesn't do anything for me.
Right. So the idea that the guy who wins the 100-meter dash is the fastest man in the world used to be a thing, right? Usain Bolt, even recently, that was awesome. There's no Usain Bolt this year, and it doesn't have the same energy, the sprint races, because you had a dominant sprinter. But even now, and I can sense it, right, in my own way, going, I don't even know who's running in the sprint races, who the number ones. I think there's a couple of Americans that are pretty good as always, but it's just it's not holding quite the same interest. And I think you're right about the dilution in general of sports being all over the place, and that the Olympic sprint champion maybe doesn't have as much.
And Olympics used to matter so much more that you knew absolutely every athlete competing in that was the absolute best athlete that country had to send. You don't necessarily know that now.
Well, certainly not when it comes to our sport, baseball, right? So baseball is back in the Olympics. And talk about a juiceless, like I just don't have any understanding why baseball's in the Olympics.
Nobody really, because it's like all the other leagues around the world are still ongoing. So it's just like you're playing without all of the best players from all the places that actually play the sport. So that impacts people's desire to watch it. Because unlike something like the World Cup, whereas if you look at millennials love the World Cup.
Right.
Because everybody goes home to play for their country for the World Cup. And you don't get that as much with some of the team sports in the Summer Olympics.
I think you make a good point, because millennials don't necessarily dislike international sports. They like the World Cup. They like Formula One.
Love Formula One.
Right. So it's not about the international aspect, but the juice that's from the Olympics, like being the country that wins the most gold medals was a thing. Like, the U.S. would always win the most gold medals in the Summer Olympics, not in the Winter Olympics.
But for most years, but the thing is, the U.S. kind of always wins the most medals.
So does that remove some of the?
It makes you're when you're a fan that grows up during that, you're not rooting for the event to happen. You're rooting for the continuation of it.
Right. I do think it's a very American thing in that respect. And the U.S., because of the money and the effort we put into the Olympic, we'll continue to do well in the Olympics as a nation, because we put a high priority on it, much higher than a lot of the other countries. We spend a lot more money on it.
Think about Americans. Americans probably find more meaning. Like, think about it. The Americans could win 32 gold medals in the Olympics, and the American people will find a story of some random single event that some tiny country run a bronze medal.
Well, the Tunisian who won the swimming gold medal on the first day of the Olympics, and they're going crazy.
Right, exactly.
In Tunisia.
Americans are like, that's way more interesting than like us
more
winning.
interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you almost get, unfortunately, like the bad guy movie effect, where it's like you win all the time, so you're inherently less interesting.
Or the Japanese won a couple of gold medals, and then how that charges up the country. So I think the national pride, and I think we're spoiled in the U.S. in that, because we've always had success, certainly in the summer games, that there's this expectation that they'll haul a bunch of medals, and I think you look at it differently. Do you actually watch the Olympics?
I will watch certain events and clips from things.
I don't know that, actually. We don't watch the Olympics together.
No.
Almost.
So like I like
never.
watching the volleyball.
Okay. The beach volleyball?
No,
or the
men's indoor volleyball.
The 6-man volleyball. Yeah, that's pretty amazing stuff.
Like, and what's interesting about that is that that's one of the few ones where you don't get this sense that there's like, yes, there's very good regions, but you have teams that are good from all over the world in a way.
Right, and the U.S. may not win, and that's okay.
They're not, and the U.S. is just a team in that.
Right,
like, and it's a cut. You don't. The problem is there are too many Olympic events also as a millennial that feel like it's really a 2-man race the entire time. Like, there's 2 countries that are going to win this event, and it's like the gymnastics. It's like, okay, there are about 50 people in this event, but nobody matters but the Chinese girl and the American girl. Well, those are the only 2 that are going to win.
And right, the U.S.
maybe the Russian
gymnastics on the men's side, used to have a fair amount of success, and not so much, anymore. And in the basketball as well, the U.S. lost to France its first game, and that actually creates more interest.
Right, because that was their first loss in an Olympics since 2004.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's like, maybe they're not.
Yeah, they've lost a bunch internationally recently, but not at the Olympics. So this is like, now that this is not an elimination game. This is still group play. So there's a good chance they come out in the next game and just abuse some poor team.
And the U.S. women's soccer team lost its first game 3-0 to Sweden, and that's a traditional rival. And that's a shocking loss and a bad loss, and maybe they'll come back for it. But that actually, if they had won their first game, here's just another one of those ones where they just roll right through it to the end.
Whereas watch the World Cup, you can root for the American men's team. And it's exciting because they're not supposed to win.
Oh, they're not going to win.
So when they're going far, it's like, oh my God, they might actually. There's an excitement there that comes from. I might be seeing something I don't normally get to see.
And does that bring you into the tournament? In that case, I'll talk about the World Cup. We're talking about the Olympics, but you'll see other teams play, and then you kind of follow the team that might have beaten the U.S. or that has had a good tournament because you've been watching the tournament, and now you're into it.
One of the most exciting things, I think, and one of the reasons why I like volleyball is that when you watch volleyball, you have all of these countries that actually play in distinctly different ways. You've got some teams that are you have a lot of the Eastern European teams that are just enormous, and that's what makes them really good, is that they're just really big and really tall. But then you have teams like Japan and Brazil that play a lot more creatively, and so you have distinct stylistic differences that you can see, whereas in a lot of the other ones it's just yeah, sure, the people from this one country might have a really interesting style, but the American guy just crushes them at it, and it doesn't matter.
So, the Olympics has to adapt, right, going forward, because it just doesn't quite carry the same, and it's a big money loser.
I think the big issues are, I'll say this, as a millennial, there are too many running events, and there are too many swimming events.
Don't watch them.
But that's what's on TV. That's what they choose to I would rather cut down those number of events and put in
now
new
you're talking about
ones.
TV coverage, and I think you're really onto something here, because you're right. It just seems like if there's any American in the competition, they're going to find a way to put the American on, even if the American doesn't have a shot to win a medal. And by the way, all countries do that.
Yeah.
When I was in Singapore one time, and the Singaporean was in the ping pong, and every TV in Singapore was on the ping pong.
Right, and that's the point of it, is to celebrate what people from your country are coming to do. But the problem is that there's too many events where it's just I'm sorry, I don't see a distinction between the 200-meter breaststroke and the 200-meter butterfly. I don't care.
And you don't really want to see the intermediate medley when they swim one of each stroke for a team. That's kind of boring.
Cut it down. Just cut the number of events down and bring in new interesting ones.
Like 3-on-3 basketball?
No, you could come up with better ones than that.
You think?
There are better ones.
What is 3-on-3 basketball?
We could go back and either reduce the number of games so that we can give the games that are the competitions that are going on a better treatment. So it's because it's just some of them are wow, that really sucks. You train your whole life, you're on the first day of the Olympics, and now you're done.
Well, and I think that's a reason why holding this Olympics in the face of COVID and the Japanese hanging in there and doing this, for all those athletes, right, that have worked their whole lives to get to this point, to get in an Olympic team, and you might not get another chance in 2024. It may not work out for you. I feel for the athletes. I feel like they should have that opportunity.
I'm glad they're having the opportunity here to compete in this Olympics, and I think that's why the Olympics are a good thing. But I think one part of the issue is that the world doesn't value as much. All of the sports leagues don't stop because the Olympics are going on anymore. They just keep going. So it's really hard to look at the baseball in the Olympics.
Don't need to have it
when you don't have half of the best players playing in the game. When you have if you had soccer in the Olympics and none of the men are going home to play soccer because they're all staying in their local leagues, what's the point? If the people didn't pull out of the NHL to play Olympic hockey every 4 years, would you want to watch an Olympic hockey tournament without all the NHL players?
No. And you're right that you can talk about winning the soccer gold medal and how cool that is.
But it means nothing compared to the World Cup.
Right. And so you've got the tennis players, right? Tennis in the Olympics, you can represent your country, you can win a gold medal. Djokovic is trying to win a golden slam like Steffi Graf did back in 1988.
Nadal proudly shows off his gold medals. Nobody gives a shit.
Nobody cares about it. Right. I think that, and that's the same thing about these, they're trying to come up with new sports in both the Winter and Summer Olympics. I think they'll have to get more X Games-y for some of the things to make it more interesting.
The problem that you have with the Olympics is there's so much prestige attached to it. The idea of potentially having events come in and then leave again within a small period of time is not, they don't like that idea.
No, you're right.
That you're going to demo stuff, basically. We're going to try this for a year or two, and then it goes away because it didn't work out.
But it is very cool in the Olympics that you win your event and you win the gold medal, and they stand you on top of the podium and they play your country's national anthem. They don't do that in any other.
I tell you, you want to get a bunch of people to watch the Olympics, do an F1 where the countries have to make the cars. There. I'm telling you, people will tune into that like it is crazy.
Perhaps a bit impractical, but fun. I agree with
Ford
that.
versus Ferrari, this stuff, people would go nuts for it.
Well, I'll just close on this note, and that is I just don't see why baseball was put back in the Olympics. Softball, I think, has more of a place in the Olympics, believe it or not, than baseball, because you don't have a major league softball tournament. So why not let that be the standard bearer?
And I'll leave you this: there will be video games at the Olympics sooner rather than later.
Oh, I think you're right about that. That's the only way to keep interest.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Coop.